Good morning, Chairman.
Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name's Robert Parker and I'm chair of the board. Want to welcome all members and officers attending the meeting today. Particularly like to welcome Martin Kyle, our new church representative. Martin is also head teacher at St Faith and St Martin's School, which is in the area that I represent, so a particular welcome to Martin. Just a reminder that the video feed for this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council website. So we also want to welcome members of the press and public who are watching our meeting online today. As the meeting is being streamed in the usual way, I'd like to remind both members and officers that your comments will remain accessible and can be reported by the media. So it's particularly important that when not speaking in the meeting to turn your microphones off unless other people may well be hearing your asides. I expect to be able to welcome at some stage the following executive councillors and executive support councillors: Councillor Martin Hill, Leader of the Council, Mark Whittington, and Executive Support Councillor for Resources, Communications and Commissioning. I'd also like to welcome Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive, and Andrew Crookham, Executive Director Resources from the Corporate Leadership Team. As usual, I want to begin with a health and safety announcement. There's no fire drill planned this morning, so in the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the doors behind and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We then wait instructions. Can I remind everybody, please, that you turn your mobiles and devices are off and are on silent. And when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you switch on your microphone, otherwise those attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public listening to our meeting won't be able to hear you. Please be aware that you need to speak directly into the microphone to be heard. If you wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand and Councillor Tom Smith, the Vice Chair, will make a note. Okay, can we now move to the agenda that we've got before us today? I'm going to start off with item 1, apologies for absence and replacement members.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Marfleet, and we will soon have Councillor Ashton as a replacement, Councillor Strengle, Councillor Reid, Richard Bootroyd, Executive Councillor for People Management, Legal and Corporate Property, and Councillor Hilton Spratt, Executive Support Councillor for People Management, Legal and Corporate Property. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of councillors' interests. As usual, members of the board are reminded that they only need to declare any relevant interests which have not been declared on their personal declaration of pecuniary interest forms. Does any member here want to declare another interest? None? Thank you. Okay, if we move to item 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting on the 15th of December 2022, I want us to be able to confirm the accuracy. So if we turn to page 5 of our papers, anybody want to comment on anything to do with page 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13? No comments? Okay. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for the accuracy of the minutes then, please? Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. So we'll now vote on the minutes. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? Any abstentions? Councillor Kendrick, thank you. Thank you. The minutes are agreed. If we now move on to item 4, announcements by the chairman's executive councillors and chief officers. If I could just say a few words. I'm pleased to report that a new church representative, Martin Kyle, has been appointed by the diocesan to sit on the board. and also on the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. Particularly welcome, Martin. Thank you for attending today, and I hope you enjoy your time with us. Following on from the last meeting of OSMB, I attended the executive on the 4th of January to present the board's comments on the commissioning of the social care client information system. The executive was advised that the Mosaic system and how it supports the council's services would be reviewed to look for any opportunity to become more efficient and create ongoing efficiencies, such as through more automation. As we know, the Mosaic system was introduced for adults and children's social care, but since it was introduced, other systems have been streamlined, and data such as education, special education needs, and elective home education has been moved onto the Mosaic system. So there is now one view of that child's individual records. The executive requested that this review of the executive should be considered by the relevant scrutiny committees to provide assurance that the Mosaic system, which is important to us all, was being used to its full potential to improve services and deliver savings. Okay, so that's my announcements. Executive Council announcements. We don't have any executive member here at the moment, I think. Nobody speaking on behalf of Councillor Hill? No, Councillor Whittington's not here either. Okay. Chief Officer announcements. Debbie, Chief Executive. Just in time, Martin. Can we just hold that a moment?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks. No, we've just come at the time, Martin. Announcements by Executive Council.
No announcements from me.
Okay. Right. Debbie.
Thank you very much, and some good news to share with the committee. A bit hot off the press, we heard yesterday that our youth offending service, locally known as Futures for Me, has been subject to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation inspection. It was a week-long inspection with 8 inspectors. The report will be published in April, but I can officially announce, and delighted to announce, that the service was judged outstanding.
Great. Really good news. Right, moving on, Andrew.
Nothing from me, Chairman, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we now move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is call-ins, consideration of any. Emily, do we have any call-ins?
No, none received, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Item 6 is consideration of councillors' calls for action. Similarly, do we have any councillor calls for action?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, thanks. Right, so we move on to substantive items on the agenda, and the big one for today is the council budget for 2023-24. So we've got Michelle Grady, Assistant Director of Finance. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Chairman. So the executive report of the 4th of January setting out the budget proposals start at page 17 of your report pack, and it sets out the proposals that are the basis of consultation before the executive will make its final budget proposals on the 7th of February, which will then go forward to council on the 17th. The paper's been brought together following recent announcements from government, namely the autumn statement presented by the Chancellor on the 17th of November and the draft local government finance settlement for 23-24, which was published on the 19th of December. These announcements actually provided more funding than we had initially anticipated, which was amidst a background of difficult economic environment with inflation remaining high, including the cost of energy, which has had a significant and direct impact on our cost base for delivering our services. Whilst providing a settlement for 1 year only, the government's also set out its plans for 24-25, but they have indicated that public spending will slow after this and have pushed decisions around the funding reforms and austerity measures that might come in to the spending review from 25-26. This creates further uncertainty for our future funding levels amidst a volatile economic environment for the cost of our services. Paragraph 118, starting on page 22, picks out the key points of the autumn settlement. The key point probably for me to highlight amongst the additional funding and deferral of the reforms for adult social care was the change in the referendum limits for the council tax. So the up to the core spending review that had gone before the settlement and the autumn statement had set a referendum limit of 3% for any increase in council tax, but the recent announcements changed that to a council tax increase of no more than 5%, which was effectively 2% for our adult social care precept and 3% for any general council tax increase. Just to point out that the tables and the information in this report was based on that 3% level of council tax increase, as that was the position we was working with at the time. Paragraphs 1.5 starting on page 20 includes some specific context and advice from the council section on the council's financial position from the council section 151 officer, considering the risks and impact of the council tax options that are presented in the report. As in previous years, we've undertaken a full review of existing emerging cost pressures and savings in order to set a one-year budget for 23-24 only. Our medium-term position is forecast to 26-27, and that's set out in paragraph 1.33 table B on page 27, and as I've said, that's based on a 3% council tax increase in each year. With the assumptions included of our funding and forecast of our cost pressures and efficiency savings, this table demonstrates that we will still have a deficit position of over 10 million in 23-24, and this deficit position continues throughout the medium-term plan period. Any budget deficits may be met by available reserves or planned reductions to be able to present a budget that's balanced, and that's what we've presented in the report. In terms of the revenue budget details for 23-24, table C at paragraph 138 sets out the position for the revenue budget for all of our services for 23-24, and full details of the service cost pressures and savings are included in the Appendix A, which starts at page 41. The total cost pressures, including pay inflation, amount to 64.9 million. The key areas of cost pressure are effectively around the inflation increases that we've seen, so pay and pension inflation, which incorporates the current year pay award, as well as 23-24 at 18 million, and large pressures on adult care and community wellbeing, with price inflation at 11.7 million and demand at 4 million. The highways maintenance contractors inflation added at 5.5 million, and energy and street lighting costs for property at 4.4 million and 3.8 million for street lighting. We've also included pressures in the report for school transport of 4.2 million. However, we'll come back onto that in a second, as there's still quite a lot of work ongoing around school transport. The savings and additional income amount to 11.3 million, which are mainly new grants and grant utilisation to offset costs, with some efficiencies but no service reductions. As I've mentioned, there was quite late notice around the referendum limits, so the report has set out options for consideration regarding our council tax rather than a single proposal. The council tax options are at paragraph 1.56, which are on page 34. The local government settlement set out the limit as 3% for a general rate increase plus 2% increase for adult social care, and the report considers options of an increase of 2.99%, 3.99% and 4.99%, which all include a 2% adult care precept being included in that, with the remaining being the general rate. Table F sets out the impact on the medium-term financial position for each option, and as said previously, all calculations, the previous calculations in the report were based on 2.99%, but the table that's set out on page 35 shows you the impact on a bandy council tax for each of the options that were being considered. So option A is 2.99%, which leaves us with a deficit position of 10.3 million in 23-24, with a total call on reserves over our MTFP period of 45 million. Option B is 3.99% council tax increase. That reduces our deficit position to 6.8 million, with a total call on reserves of 30 million over that period. And option C is an increase of 4.99%, which reduces the deficit position to 3.4 million, with a total call on reserves of 15 million over that period. The financial risks are set out on paragraph 1.7, which is page 37, which effectively include the economic context and inflation, uncertainty around our funding base beyond 24/5, the delivery of future year savings targets, the demand for services, and council tax and business rates collection through the districts. Our reserves position is stated at paragraph 1.7, which starts at page 37, and the narrative that's been provided in the report by the Section 151 officer sets out a prudent level of reserve to maintain for financial volatility. The requirement to draw down those reserves will depend on what option of council tax increase is agreed by the council. A review of existing earmarked reserves has identified 3 reserves that are no longer required for their original purpose, which are detailed in paragraph 1.74, which total 8.7 million, which can be used to offset any budget shortfall or repurposed for other activity. Just to note that earmarked reserves are cash balances, so therefore can only be used once rather than for managing year-on-year costs. In terms of our capital programme, in line with our capital strategy, we have updated our 10-year programme, and that's been proposed in the report. Full details of the programme are included in Appendix B. Whilst the programme's been extended, no new major schemes have been added, with updates being provided for existing major schemes, namely Grantham Southern Relief Road and the North Highcombe Relief Road, and specialist school provision to reflect the inflationary pressures on these major schemes. In terms of consultation, the service budgets have been through to each scrutiny committee to review the proposals, and comments from these meetings will be considered by the executive when making its final proposals on the 7th of February. We have a consultation meeting tomorrow, which business and partner organisations have been invited to, and any feedback from that meeting will also be provided. We've had public consultation going on throughout January on the website and through Let's Talk Lincolnshire. There's been a small response to that, about 58 responses, and when the specific question was asked about the options that were put forward around council tax, 38% of the respondents choosing option A, which is the 3% increase, 20% choosing option B, which is the 4%, and 18% choosing option C, which is 5% increase. 8% of total respondents choosing no change, and 12% not indicating a preference, just adding comments to their response. And a number of specific questions have also been answered by the finance team directly. So at that point, I'll just hand over for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew, Section 151 officer, you've nailed your colours to the mast in one sense at paragraph 1.8 by saying that my advice is to maximise the council tax flexibilities available. That means consider setting the maximum 4.99%. Do you want to say a bit more and add to what Michelle's already said?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Parker. Yeah, so as Michelle said in her introduction, and particularly drawing emphasis to paragraph 1.7, I've said it previously, particularly in the executive meeting, this has been a budget setting process like no other really, given the magnitude of the budget pressures that we've faced and we've essentially set out as funding in this paper, and also the uncertainty running into future years. You know, we've been anticipating for a number of years now a fair funding review. That's clearly still not happened yet, and when we've talked about planning for the future, our reserve base, for example, we've always looked towards the fair funding review as a point in time where we would be able to take a view on, you know, the future shape of the council. We're still to see that yet, and we will not see it for at least a further 2 years. A number of other factors that Michelle referred to, the fair cost of care reform, the delays around that, we were expecting significant cost changes around that basis. But also as well, any future outcomes of general elections, which we know will have another one before 2025. All of that uncertainty comes together alongside the factors that we haven't got set out a balanced position, even at 5%, is naturally the recommendation that I'd provide as the Council's Chief Finance Officer, is to go for the maximum amount possible. I acknowledge in the text that it is a really difficult decision for members to take, given the economic circumstances that the residents of Lincolnshire are facing, albeit at the end of the day, the main focus for the council is to provide good council services to those residents, and the best way that we can continue to do that, in my eyes and my professional opinion, is to maximise the amount of council tax that we've got available in the base. Michelle also referred to increased grants, grants that we didn't anticipate when we were planning the budget earlier on in the summer. Whilst they are very welcome and help us present a close to balanced position to members, that is money that can ultimately be taken away. And those of us who lived through austerity, when you haven't got, clearly you can control and you manage the council tax income, it's in the base and you have it forevermore. Grants can be taken away from you as well. So it's an element of building in some resilience into our funding base as well, which backs that recommendation from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, who would like to speak? I'd be interested in chairs of scrutiny committees other than ours to comment on what happened in their particular scrutiny committees. Who'd like to go first? I'm not a chair, but I'll go first. Thank you. That gives the chairs time to think.
Break the ice.
Thank you, Jackie.
I'll ask the stupid questions first. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this report, actually, and thank you for making it very user-friendly. This isn't an easy thing to put across, especially when it needs to be public-facing, but I found that the way you wrote it, it almost the small separate sections, it was very helpful. Thank you. I support Mr. Crookham's position here because we're in a very difficult position. Everybody is feeling significant pinch in their income. But if the services are to be provided, then we have to have the money to do so. Unless we can find some other way of getting the money in, we have to make these charges. But in addition, if we don't make them now, then there's going to be the year-on-year loss going forward. It's a very worrying position, but I certainly would be voting for that particular recommendation. I wonder if I can ask a specific question, please. It's a small one. On page 26, paragraph 1.26. I was interested in what you said about the grant conditions being placed on adult social care grant and discharge funding. And it says, and therefore the budget assumes new costs. So that actually begs quite a few questions. So when these changes are made generally, would you expect new costs to come in? And if so, what sort of costs are we talking about? And is there any idea of the amount of these costs? Thank you. It seems interesting that they're giving us a grant and then attaching costs.
I think there are new expectations around the costs that we incur. So the specific one that's referenced in the report is the new discharge fund that the government's put in effectively to support the NHS to get people out of hospitals quicker, to support their situation. It means that we're commissioning care beds that we wouldn't have commissioned for our own purpose. So there are costs we're incurring that we wouldn't have incurred through our normal service delivery. So some of these grants, specifically around adult social care, come with costs that we wouldn't have incurred as part of our normal service delivery. So they offset each other. I think the discharge fund is 4.8 million. We're commissioning beds we wouldn't have normally commissioned to make sure people are getting out of hospital quicker.
Thank you. Tom, you wanted to contribute. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chairman. Andrew will probably know what I'll talk about because it's a bit of my pet subject. It is very frustrating, and it's probably equally frustrating for you, if not more so, with it being your day job, sitting here and it be the proverbial can go in further down the road of a funding review or lack of one. I know, obviously, you do, and others in your position do what they can with the County Treasurer's organisation. Do we have any rumblings, any idea of when anything will be done at all? Because this has obviously gone on for a very long time.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Smith. So, like with clearly the government have set out a spending package now till to cease at the point of the next general election, and there's no information beyond that. So, as far as we know at the moment, the earliest that we'll see a fair funding type review or settlement would be after 25, 2026. Work that was been undertaken in terms of things like formula distribution, deprivation indices, rurality and sparsity, all of that work still needs to be done. So, you know, if I was a betting man, I'm not, but it's still some way away.
Thank you. Who else wants to speak? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Yes, speaking from the point of view of children and young people, we looked at a number of aspects, and one of the areas that was what we described as a key financial risk was children in care, because it's difficult to predict the number of children who may be coming into care. It's believed to be an increasing number due to migration into Lincolnshire and transfer schemes and so on. So we were pleased that assumptions had been built into the budget to allow for that. Other areas where we touched on, which we were concerned about, was the social work workforce. There's a challenge in recruiting and retaining social workers, and we regard that as presenting a financial risk, but we understand measures are starting to stabilise as regards that one. Obviously, the big one for all of us is inflation, and there are cost pressures on all our services, including children's services, and to have something built in on that was very important from our point of view. Other areas that we touched on as well was, as it's known, we are supporting North East Lincolnshire Council, and one of the questions that we had in the meeting was what impact that might have on our finances, but fortunately we understand that that's externally funded, so that was reassuring from the committee's point of view. Those are just a few points, Chairman, that we did examine it, and we did make comment in detail. Thank you.
Councillor Carrington.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It is a particularly difficult time, as other members have said, to be setting a budget of any description. And I know that this council is going through processes, our second tier are going through processes, and indeed I was at a parish council the other evening, and they are having exactly the same thoughts. Ultimately, all levels of local government are there to provide services. And in difficult times, those services that we provide are all the more important to the people who are most vulnerable, who should be first and foremost in our thoughts. And it seems to me, in my experience, if you explain, and by you I mean we, I mean every member as well as the council corporately, if we explain what it is we are doing, if we explain in detail why we have to charge what we have to charge, we explain what the services we provide are, and people can see that in their own lives, then I think we're on a sound basis. And I'm particularly bearing in mind here the comments that Mr. Cookham made about securing the future base. A wise person once said that the most powerful force in the entire universe is the law of compound interest. And if we fall behind, we kind of never get over that. And I think all councils need to learn that lesson. And the government also looks at what we're doing. We've had some good news about some unexpected grant funding, but as we're all aware, most grant funding from central government now, we have to bid as a council competitively and put forward a case. The government looks at what we are charging. It looks at what we are doing with our own council tax, and they do not look favourably upon organisations who do not charge what they could charge in terms of council tax and then go to central government for particular pots of money. Chairman, I would absolutely acknowledge that there is almost a moral dimension as well as a financial dimension in making the decisions we have to make. But I think that the recommendation which officers have put forward is the wisest one for the future, but is down to all of us in this room, individually as well as corporately, to make sure that we go out there and make sure that our residents understand where we're coming from. Thank you, Chairman.
I'm pleased that you opened the debate into what you call the moral issue, because essentially it's a choice between who pays for the extra money that we haven't got. Do we take it out of balances, or do we put the responsibility with the individual council taxpayer? And that's the choice, and we've got four choices, really. Okay, who's next? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't actually present on Monday due to being ill, but I watched the meeting. I watched the Highways and Transport Scrutiny meeting on the link, so I was able to hear and see what was being said. I mean, obviously, it is a difficult time for everybody with the inflation and everything, but the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee went through the proposals, and the the cost pressures there, the 5.5 million highways maintenance and 3.8 million street lighting, the energy costs for street lighting and traffic signals, etc. Those had already been well briefed in previous reports to the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee, and although no specific comment was made on that, my feeling was that they knew that was there and were pleased that that was in the that was being included in the budget proposals for the coming year, and also the 12.5 million that we were left short by the government a couple of years ago, that was still being included in the proposed budget, but there was no specific comments on that. The comments were mainly concerns about the capital programme, and that we would be able to maintain our commitments to the North Highcombe Relief Road and the major schemes that are going forward, and that the Grantham Southern Relief Road, and that the extra capital required for those was not going to stop our commitment to the schemes and stop Grantham Southern Relief Road carrying on, and the North Highcombe Relief Road carrying on to programme. And it was mentioned that money from the Spalding Western Relief Road, the capital from that would be going, that scheme would be deferred for a while, so that capital that was set aside for that could be brought forward and diverted onto the other capital schemes that I've just mentioned, to save those delay on those. There was also asked if the impact on the impact of the decline in the price of diesel on budgets would help going forward. Obviously, that will help. But nobody really knows where that's going. And there was lots of questions raised about the different issues about the capital schemes. So there was no recommendation gone through from the committee saying that they supported the budget. But you know, me personally, I do support the budget recommendations, and I support the increase of the 5%, because I think we're just storing up problems for the future if we don't look after our reserves, because you can only use reserves once, and you know, and that is the problem. And looking at the projections in the charts, you know, if we don't go for the 5% this time, we are going to be using large chunks of reserves then going forward, or have an even bigger choice to make as to how high we put the council tax up by. So I know that times are difficult, but it really is a difficult decision. But you know, I think that's what we've got to do. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Pepper.
Thank you, Chairman. We have a slight anomaly with public protection, in as much that our meeting is next week. It's after this meeting, so we haven't looked at it yet. But having said that, I'm confident the committee will support what has been put in front of them, particularly because most of the areas covered, there's been minimal increases, or in fact no increases at all. I think the largest one being fire and rescue, being a statutory body, our hands are tied there. Most of that cost pressure is due to fuel, and also the withdrawal of a Home Office grant. So yeah, even though we're not at the meeting yet, I'm happy for that to go ahead from our point of view. And overall, I support what's being said this morning, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Dilks.
Good morning, thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Andrew Crookham and Michelle and the whole team. I know it was a very late settlement. Was it the 19th of December? So we were all thinking about Christmas. I'm not sure if you got one, but I enjoyed mine anyway, thank you. I think it is right that we are consulting on a range of options this time, given the uncertainty probably, you know. I am disappointed though, to hear we've only had 58 responses so far. And I just wonder, when is the deadline for people to respond? Do they normally wait till the day before the deadline and then respond? But I just thought we could, might be an opportunity now to plug, the opportunity to those who are actually going to pay the bills to actually have a say in this. I just on the reserves point, I understand, I've read the report, 8.7 of reserve balances can be repurposed. Welcome that. I just wonder if you could say a bit more about the state of reserves and all the reserves. We talk about general reserves being, 16 million, and the volatility reserve, I believe, is 47 million, thereabouts. Can you just say a bit more about, how much have we got squirreled away that we can actually call on? And I do understand what colleagues are saying, that you can only use them once, but I'd just like a bit more clarification for, as I say, those people who are paying the bills. I also hear what Councillor Carrington says about the one-year settlement. I remember Michael Gove, I think it was last year at the LGA conference, saying that, don't worry, we're going to have, I think it was a 2-year settlement in the, in the year coming up. Well, obviously that was before all the changes in government that we went through, that I won't mention. But he also spoke about, and there was an intention to address the so many pots of money that councils have to bid for and spend an awful lot of time bidding for, and then not being successful in, getting some of the money that we've all paid in, getting it back. I realise it's a, a political sort of challenge, but I just sort of wondered, how much does that sort of cause us a problem? But I think the main thing was, can we up the rate and actually let people know what the, again, what the consultation's all about, and give people, remind them that they've got the opportunity to respond. Because 58, isn't very many. I don't know what 0.whatever% it is, but it's clearly not. It's not a ringing endorsement of anything, is it? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to, we've got people here from Highways, and you were saying essentially that the detail wasn't there, but sorry, because the meeting hadn't yet been held. Does anybody from Highways want to contribute about the budget in relation to Highways in particular? Fine.
Sorry, correction there, Chairman. I'm sorry if you misunderstood. The meeting was held on Monday, Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting.
Right.
And
so
that's where, and I reported on what they had said there, but I also put some personal thoughts in. I wasn't there on Monday because I was sick, and so unfortunately I couldn't be here. And Vice Chairman stood in for me, but I gave the report that was sent forward to the executive. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, anybody else who's not spoken yet? Members of the Scrutiny Committee? If not, Councillor Hill, Martin.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to give a bit of context of, what the sort of overall viewpoint is, I suppose. And like yourself, we were both at the CCN meeting yesterday, which I think we had some, which was useful in terms of getting some intelligence as to what's happening elsewhere. So I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of CCN is county councils, basically, so similar authorities, it would appear, the vast majority of those are actually going for the full they've allowed 5% increase. In terms of, obviously, the government's position has been raised, and as Councillor Dilk says, there is a one-year settlement, but I think what is clear, the DLUC, the department itself, has had a 2-year settlement from government, and what isn't finalised is what will happen next year, but there is quite there won't be much change. There may be some tweaks here and there, but I think it's fair to say we are fairly confident what's actually going to happen within the next 2 years, so we can plan with some certainty where we are. And as has been said, the settlement was better than anticipated, particularly in light of the pressures on adult social care. So that was very good news, and that has been addressed. But it's only a stay of decision, really, because obviously the major things still on the horizon are not only the continuing pressure on general adult care services, but also the social care reforms, which of course will be a massive change for us. So although we've got more time now to get ourselves ready for the fair cost of care, whatever that means, and indeed people being protected from the full cost of social care with a cap, shall we say, does mean in 2 years' time there is a massive uncertainty as to what the position will be. I think, although it was a better settlement than anticipated, and we should acknowledge that, it is also clear that there are quite a lot of uncertainties, as Andrew has said. In particular, there's 2 particular areas, both relating to children's services, which are a concern. One is about homeschool transport, which I think does need to be addressed, because the budget is, although extra money has been put in the budget, provisional budget, I think there still is a big cost pressure there, mostly due to inflation. And the second was SEND's special educational needs. And I think the truth of the matter is the government, although there's been 2 reviews now into reforming that and addressing the ever-increasing cost, it's pretty clear, I think, informally, that nothing much will happen for the next 2 years. And although we are in a much better place than many of our colleagues, particularly with SEND, but also with budget as well, I think that's another issue which will come back and have to be addressed. And nationally, there's a I forget, it's 50 or 60 billion black hole where the ever-increasing cost of SEND to provision is becoming a big problem, and the government really does need to get that addressed. But it seems that the next government will be left with that position. So again, that's another uncertainty. The other thing I would say is that the budget does include not only the £8 million of releasing reserves, but also whatever option is chosen, there will still be a use of reserves, which we need to do that. And as I think you said, Chairman, it will be a fairly straight choice as to what you do about that. So I think it's a challenging, as always, a challenge. The longer term is quite challenging. But in terms of highways, just to the actual £12 million which we lost, the bad news in the budget was there was nothing about replacing the 12 million or the 25% highways maintenance budget we lost, and there was nothing about fair funding nationally. So one assumes both those are probably kicked into the longer grass. So in terms of our budget, we have now put that 12 million in the base budget, so it's there for the foreseeable future. But fully appreciate there are, even though we have also tried to address the very high inflation costs, which particularly highways have had to endure over the last year, which have been substantial, but also tried to increase the budget or give enough budget to try and cover that. But I think it's fair to say there is quite a lot of pressure out there, and those of us that go to parish councils and other or our local meetings, whatever they be, I think all of us are, are well used to hearing that the public out there would like even more investment in highways. And following the consultation, I suppose it's something that we will also have to take into account. So I think in the circumstances, we're in a better position than we thought we'd be But as always, there is a concern about the future and what's going to happen in 2 years' time. But the reassuring news is we are in a far better place than many of our contemporaries, and indeed there is a growing concern about some of the smaller councils, both unitary councils and small district councils, many of which are now getting to a stage where I think across the country you hear there is a lot of concern about their sustainability in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak? Yep, Councillor Ashton again.
Thank you, Chairman. Goes back to a point Councillor Brooks made actually around and Councillor Hill around the 12 million that we put through reserves for highways. Andrew, in your professional opinion, how long can we continue to do that for?
Well, once a figure's in the base, obviously we naturally update our medium-term financial planning every year, as you'll see as we move through this report and the report into council. So, like any other cost that we incur, you have to see it in the round, and then if there are gaps in future, you then have to make decisions based on whether you believe you can bridge them through council tax, grant funding, or reductions in spend. So it's in, as Councillor Hill says, for now, but it'll depend on a number of factors around those uncertainties that we talk about and our approach to them as time progresses.
Okay. Anyone else? Sorry, anyone else? No? Yep, Councillor Dilks again.
Thanks, just for allowing me to come back. I did ask about reserves, and we kind of moved on. I just wondered if I could get a response to that question. Thank you.
Michelle?
So the closing date for the public consultation through our website is today. I think the comms team have been doing a great job about pushing the messages out through the web to get response to that survey. But obviously we need to look at how we do that going forward, I think, to get more engagement. And obviously we've got the business consultation meeting tomorrow, so hopefully we'll get some more feedback from that. In terms of reserves, the balance at the beginning of the year was around £240 million, £1,000 to get me thousands of millions right there. The school's balance is included in there as well, so that was around 28 million, so that's the school's carry forward that automatically goes back into the school's balances. Around half of that is revenue grants, so grants we receive that are for a specific purpose, and we hold on our balance sheets if there are any underspends cumulatively over the years, so things like the Better Care Fund, Public Health, some of the service-specific funds, grants, that they're all maintained in there. The larger reserves that we have, we've just talked about the financial volatility reserve, so that's 47 million at the moment. Also, we have a couple of large reserves in there, so the development fund, a large reserve. We've used reserves in previous years to kind of bolster some of the highway spend, aside from the 12 million that we've put in our base. Quite a lot of that will be drawn down during the year and has already been spent, actually. And we have a couple of larger reserves, like the insurance fund. But the 8.7 is part of the review of those reserves that we've done to identify those that can be repurposed. So hopefully that answers some of that question.
Thank you. And finally, anybody else? Yep, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Parker. Just a point of emphasis to the question really, and about the financial volatility reserve, and linking up to what Councillor Hill said about other areas of the sector. So clearly, as we've said, it's an extraordinary budget this year. We've got cost pressures that are probably 2.5, 3 times as much as we'd normally expect in a normal year. Not that we've had one of those for a few years now, what with COVID and what have you. But you know, if you're looking at that level of cost pressure, the level of gap that might you know, present to you when you're doing your budget planning, a financial volatility reserve is absolutely the right thing to hold at that point, because you're not looking in a panic-stricken state at your financial plans thinking we need to radically change the size of the council. Not a lot of councils have got those in place now, given the challenges over the last few years, and when Councillor Hill talked about our contemporaries, a number of those have been embarking on serious cost reduction programmes that we've not had to be forced into at this particular point, because we've been able to plan accordingly and what have you. So just as we've talked about in previous committees here, it needs to be seen as a positive thing in that sense, in the sense that it allows you to plan properly for your finances.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, my personal thoughts. Okay, I think the starting point really is a recognition that we are an internal organisation here talking to ourselves about what we think is good, just like the CCN meeting yesterday was about local government talking to itself. And the big payers are the council taxpayers out there. Now, that's pretty important in my view, because while on the one hand we may take a view that the settlement is better than anticipated, we have low recognition almost of what to expect from government in recent years. But I think we also need to recognise that better than anticipated local government settlement enabled us to go out and ask the council taxpayer to pay between 1.9 and 4.9% increase. So is that part of the better than anticipated? Because I'm not so sure there's a lot of people out there who have their council tax increased by 4.9% at a time when lots of people are struggling to make ends meet. Will actually see that as a better than anticipated settlement. I think we've got a duty personally to acknowledge what the consultation says, which doesn't close until tomorrow. So I think that ought to be revisited after and before the executive, because there will be an opportunity for me as the OSMB representative to report to the executive on the 7th of February, the information about what the punters, as it were, are actually saying. We heard briefly, and if I recollect, the highest number was 30-odd% going for 1.9%. Is that 3? Sorry, say again.
It was 3%, so the highest was
3% was the highest. Okay, yeah. Fine. So we've got some time to hear. So it might be seen by some as a better anticipated settlement, but is it better for the people that we represent? And that's one of the questions that I think needs a proper attention. Okay. Unless anybody else wants to speak, can we move to look at the recommendation on page 17, which says that we recommend that the executive approves the following elements of the budget for 2023-4 as its initial proposals, subject to further consultation and scrutiny. And then it goes on to talk about the budget requirement, pre-use of reserves set out in Table D, the budget savings and cost pressures covering the 2023-4 financial year are set out in Appendix A, and the draft capital programme for 2023-4 onwards in Appendix B. And we also note the advice of the Executive Director for Resources as asked Section 151 Officer at paragraphs 1.5 to 1.11. So they're the recommendations. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? 3 abstentions. Thank you. Thanks for that, and thanks for all the hard work that went into it. You know, I appreciate we get these papers after long and arduous work being done by other people, our officers, and thank you for that. So, if we move on to the next item, which is item 8, service revenue and capital budget proposals, to receive a report from Adam here. Adam Hopley, Strategic Finance Lead, Corporate. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. Just before I go through the report, I'd just like to introduce myself as a recent new entrant into the organisation. So my name's Adam Hopley. I'm Strategic Finance Lead for corporate areas. So my role includes coordinating council-wide financial management processes like the budget setting and the budget monitoring processes that we go through. And it also includes providing strategic financial support to the Resources Directorate, supported by my team. I joined the council 4 months ago, so partway through the budget setting process. I'm here today to present the Service Revenue and Capital Budget Proposals 23-24 report, which specifically considers the budget proposal and associated adjustments within the Resources Directorate and includes corporate services with that too. Michelle's just presented the Council Budget 23-24 report, which sets out the budget position and the wider context for the whole Council. The report I'm presenting also contains some of this context, which is especially relevant when considered as a standalone item, However, given Michelle has just gone through this, I don't intend to repeat those elements again, with the exception of where that specific finance wider context has specific relevance to or impact on the resources budget proposal. Within the report I'm presenting, I'd like to draw your attention to Table A on page 67. This table sets out the change in proposed budget by service area within resources. Table A shows that there are cost pressures totaling 8.9 million and cost reductions amounting to 1.5 million contained within the budget proposal. The detail which supports the cost pressures can be seen on the following page, on page 68, and generally tend to fall into 4 key areas. One big one that's already sort of been raised this morning is around energy inflation, so the increased cost of energy, which has generally been attributed to sort of gas supply, storage shortages, the Ukraine war, and then the consequential enforced market restrictions, has a direct impact on the rates paid by the council for energy. So under our current framework, the council's energy intermediary, Eastern Shire's purchasing organisation, forward purchase on behalf of the council during the windows of opportunity. And they provide us with regular forecasts and regular updates on how that's progressing, which has directly informed the budget proposal itself. So that's amounts to about half of the cost pressures that we're talking about. So energy and utility inflation, about 4.4 million in total overall. That isn't a 4.4 million step up from where we are now. That's a recognition that the 22-23 cost already contains some extra cost within it as well. So it's just reflecting the budget to make that step change in the budget. There's obviously in the news earlier this month, the government announced that the new energy bills discount scheme, which that'll be replacing the energy bill relief scheme, which ends at the end of March. So the new energy bills discount scheme has been announced, and we're currently working through what, if any, impact that will have on us, and it depends on the wholesale rates and whether we're below the rate that the government determined support to be appropriate to receive from. So that's something that we're actively doing within the background now. In addition to the energy inflation, we move on. We've got other inflation. I mean, inflation is a key topic. You know, the economic environment's changed massively in the past 12 months. You know, the rate of inflation reaching record high levels, and it's currently maintaining it around that level. Many of the contracts that we've got within services are index linked, which then leads to sort of the automatic uplifting cost of which some of this proposal takes into account as well. The inflationary uplifts also take into account changes in the national living wage, which obviously the government announced is higher than what had previously been assumed. So that's also contained within that. The other key cost area to sort of just to focus on is around the new contract for the East Midlands Public Service network, which is forecast to cost around another £1 million next year. So that reflects a change in the cost of the income model under that arrangement, with a reduction in income from schools and external partners who will source their own arrangements. So it ensures a bigger share of the cost rests with the council. So that's another key change within the budget proposal. In respect of all of the adjustments that are within that section, there's key elements like the additional cost within the legal Lincolnshire model, and that in part reflects extra reliance on locum solicitors at the minute, which the service are trying to work through how to mitigate that, and higher IT storage costs, which reflects increasing demand, but it also reflects exchange rate. When that goes the wrong way, it leads to extra costs for us because we pay in dollars. So moving on to the next page, there are planned cost efficiency reductions associated with our transformation programmes, specifically the continued optimisation of business support processes, which includes an element for anticipated reductions in printing costs. And there are cost reductions enabled through the digital transformation programme. So they're assumed as a way of trying to improve the efficient operation of support services. I'm going to move on to capital now, and in the report I'd like to take you to Table B on page 70. The services which form the Resources Directorate they're not particularly capital intensive services when compared to something like highways. That said, there is planned capital investment of nearly 38 million in property and 34 million in IMT over the 11-year period from 2022-3 to 2032-33 based on our long-term forward plans. The vast majority of this relates to block capital investment in property maintenance and the IT infrastructure. and refresh programme, which in effect is maintaining council assets and enabling the effective delivery of council services. That brings me to the end of the report and what I wanted to say for it, so happy to pass over for questions.
Great, thank you. Who wants to ask the first question? Yep. Anyone? Okay. Yep, thank you, Jackie.
Microphone.
Pardon, thank you very much. I noticed that you've prepared a 10-year capital programme, and I was wondering, given the uncertainty, when you read through a report like this, there are so many ifs. We can do this if the government does that. We can do this if that happens. Very, very difficult to make a financial plan going forward under those conditions. So given the uncertainties and the cost pressures that we're all anticipating in, for example, 1925, 96, people are starting to talk about that quite a lot. How solid a prediction can you make for our capital programme going forward, you know, given the uncertainties elsewhere? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that, Councillor Brockway, Chairman, if that's possible. Yeah, so so the obviously all the figures that we just talked about in the previous report are based. Obviously, there's quite a lot of interconnected parts, and funding the 10-year capital programme is one of them. So, in taking a decision on the revenue budget, there is a I guess there's a trajectory assumed in terms of the capital spend that we settle on when members agree the capital programme at the council in February. Clearly, there are some almost fixed cost elements to the capital programme in the resources area. So the IT lines, for example, assume regular refresh update of kit. So we have to provide laptops, desktops, IT equipment for both staff members and in some cases partnership working to be able to do, and they carry a fixed cost. Clearly there's an interlinked element related to our property costs as well. So we own and operate a number of a significant number of buildings across the county to provide services to people, and again they require maintenance. You can flex that maintenance, and I guess if linking to the question Councillor Brockway about uncertainty 25-26, again there are always decisions to be made about things around the extent and level of maintenance that you take. The current level of maintenance that we're undertaking and have been undertaking for a number of years is reflected in this current paper, albeit is a decision that could be made in future that you could reduce that, albeit that has negative impacts on potentially on service delivery and may lead to ultimately higher costs in the long run due to assets not being in the level of repair that they should be. But I hope that sufficiently answers the question to start with.
Excuse me, just sticking with property, I noticed, and I think you may have explained it, but on page 70 we have property maintenance for the current year at 2.6 million and going up to, for the next financial year, 5.819 million. Okay, and then below that is Orchard House repairs. I had discussions with the Chief Executive about our, should we say, footprint in this part of the world. I just wondered if we can say whether any money's been put into what we might call reorganisation of services, because there's a number of parts of our property network that's not been occupied to maximum potential.
With regards to the current campus, there isn't an approved business case for any works yet, so no. As we undertake with new capital projects, there is a new capital developments contingency in the wider capital programme that if works were required, that we would present a business case to the leader of the council as the portfolio holder for finance to consider, and clearly if they were within limits they would come through scrutiny as well. I think I did see Councillor Hill's hand fly up there, so I don't know if he's got a follow-on comment as well, but that the figures that are outlined are based on planned maintenance, based on condition surveys, asset reviews and what have you that form part of the wider asset management process in property.
Councillor Hill.
Yes, I think in terms of all of this debate, and it is, I think, very much a movable feast that the business plan does assume a 40% reduction in the number of properties or buildings or whatever you want to, which the council maintains. So obviously is that, I think work is finally starting, and as hopefully you're aware that the houses on the avenue there currently are on the market and are due to be sold, I believe. And there are other buildings which also, and you're quite right, that a lot of buildings aren't being occupied. It does reduce the maintenance, but of course there still is some maintenance and there will be an issue of deterioration. So I think there is in the absence of Councillor Troy, there is a programme being planned in terms of what properties we dispose of. I think we have to do that in a measured way, and of course just at this particular moment in time, probably selling property is, well, commercial property is probably not the best move, but there are decisions to be made on this campus, particularly with the orchard houses A and B. And actually, I did hear from colleagues elsewhere in the country yesterday morning that it's quite common, a lot of councils are looking at repurposing their county offices and maybe having a corporate core in part of it and then having obviously letting it out or having another use for it. So I think there is a programme which we do need to step up and get on with, which will mean we need to start making some more decisions about, for example, the orchard houses, what we do with them and how we move forward. And then in that there's the cost of demolition, of course, and if there's a lot of asbestos present in some buildings, then there's that issue as well. But that's the plan. So whether we need quite as much, but I think as we've done with Lancaster House, which is the modern building opposite this one, what we're left with, I think we need to make sure that what we still have is of really good quality, so that it is more efficient and probably a better place for staff to work in. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to give us your thoughts about a timescale?
Well, I think, I'm going to defer to Andrew, but I think, obviously, as I've just said, we've started now, and there are other buildings where we know there is interest from within the city and the county where there is interest in it from other organisations to take it on. So I would hope, my hope will be, or my expectation, is that we will have a plan. We already have a list of those properties which we think we don't need. We already have a list of those which there is a choice to be made. So I would think this year we need to formally decide what we're doing and then make some decisions and start getting some of these buildings off our books.
Sorry to continue this, but have we got a strategy for what we might call our footprint? Okay, that was a question to yourself, Martin, but I'm happy for... Yeah.
I'll take that if that's okay, Councillor Parker. Yeah, so there's a couple of or a few layers to this at the moment. So obviously there's the campus that we're sat on at the moment, and Councillor Hill referred to the avenues, the Orchard House buildings. There's obviously the legal frontage on Newland as well that are all in play. We are working intensively to a point of March to come up with a proposal and business case for that to be considered. Separate to that, there is the wider locality working. Again, Councillor Hill referred to a number of buildings in localities that are at a lower usage occupancy or not working in an optimal way. Again, there's a piece of work that follows the campus work, so into the 23-24 administrative year that would bring that to the fore, and that involves moves, potential relocations and what have you as well that need to be worked through with service teams. Yeah, so that's where we're at the moment. The overarching strategy is the one that we have discussed in this chamber previously, is around that full adoption of that smarter working hybrid model of working, which is predominantly based on office-based workers being in work 2 days a week, working from home 3 days a week. That doesn't necessarily translate into the localities, and as I said, that clearly where people, highways operatives, social workers are using office spaces to drop down in for various parts of the day. That needs a bit more nuanced work to work through in terms of occupancy. hence it being a separate piece of work and one that is being worked through, again, as we speak.
We had the smarter working paper, but that didn't in itself have at its base what we might call a strategic plan for the new ways of working and the impacts it would have on property. And I'm just interested in knowing how far advanced it is before we can expect to get a paper, as Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, about a proposal to have an all-embracing picture, which would then help us to better understand how we're going to move into the next, well, not the rest of this decade.
Yep. So due to those two pieces of work, I think it depends whether there is a there is a clamour to resolve the Newland campus question. So my recommendation we would bring back an earlier piece of work on that that would be that can naturally be scrutinised because there'll be decisions emanating from it. But I think it's also just important to note as well, and something that we talked about when we brought the smarter working paper into this committee, was that we did say that there was going to be a learning year. So we didn't make any snap judgments in terms of closing specific buildings and doing anything radical. And I think we'd acknowledge, wouldn't we, Debbie, that over the year from February last year to the learning year will end in February, essentially. People's attitudes and patterns to work have changed. I've naturally seen over the past 3 or 4 months the building and people wanting to come in to connect with their teams is a lot higher than it was when we first started out on the learning year. So I think it was the right thing to do, and will provide us with good sound evidence base on what to make, or how to present some decisions for members to take in due course.
Okay, Martin, you want to come back?
I think you make a very valid point, and I think this year, before the end, in the summer, I would hope that there is a paper brought forward. There are some imponderables, because we do obviously know you can do the calculation. If people are only in 2/5 of the working week, you can do a straight calculation of what that means. There are issues about partners, and obviously we do try and share office space with partners, which has been very successful, particularly in highways, but in other areas, social care is another one, where people work together as a team, so you don't get the problems with working with partners. But I think it's very reasonable to say that we need to get to the stage where we have a plan and we outline what is publicly what we're going to keep and what we're going to dispose of, and that's the way forward. We've just a new head of properties just started, so I think one of the first tasks that Councillor Betroyd has given her is to get this sorted out and have a plan, and then there'll be a disposal plan at an appropriate pace, which will do that. Because we do need to start making some formal decisions and get on with it.
You want to say something?
Yeah, please. So just to add to that picture, and absolutely, the new head of property has been tasked with coming up with the strategy, the plan, and certainly we want to prioritise the Newland campus, and so it will be a moving picture in terms of the localities, but certainly the timescales that we're looking at would be sort of March time, so whether or not it fits with the March meeting or the April meeting, we'll need to factor in, but that's roughly the sort of timeline. Just to identify that the other complexity in terms of this links to the next paper around the re-procurement of the back office, because clearly as part of that, some of the recommendations would be to in-source teams. We'd also be looking at utilising our premises, if possible, as part of the procurement of a customer service centre. So there's quite a lot of complexity in terms of being able to do the number crunching around needs and to engage with the services and those services that we don't currently manage at the moment, but to engage with our partners in terms of that. So lots of moving parts, but in summary, certainly the timescales that we're looking at, particularly around the Newland campus as a priority, is the sort of March, April time.
Thanks. You wanted to come back again, Martin?
I mean, obviously, just get too focused on this campus. Just to say, actually, across the whole county, I think we've made quite good progress. For example, Louth, we have Keeley House, which is the one building where services have been consolidated. We are doing similar work across all the major towns of the county, so that across the whole period there is a reasonably located building where staff can either work permanently from 2 days a week or indeed drop into and do their required work. Obviously, the other issue is the rollout of IT, so more staff can actually not go to the office at all when they're out on the road. They can do all their sort of admin work as they move around. But so it's not as if nothing's been done. There is a lot of work going on in all the localities, and we're hoping also to work with district councils, and we already share space with many of them in terms of joint office space, so that's working as well. But I think the point is well taken that by the summer there should be a paper coming. Obviously, it's up to the officers what you, Chairman, when that date is, with a plan, and so everybody knows where we are, and we are on target to reduce the number of buildings we have.
I'm pleased that you made the point about there's another world outside of the Lincoln campus, because that was going to be my second point about what we're doing in the rest of the county, but you've answered that. Any other councillors who want to speak? Okay. Adam, is there anything you want to have a comment on?
No, I think the sort of the action required from this. So this is part of the scrutiny for the resources area. So this is the committee that considers it. So I think it was just to give the opportunity to have that specific.
Well, if we turn to page 63, which is the actions required, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board is asked to consider this report and provide comments on the budget proposals for consideration by the Executive at its meeting on the 7th of February. Those comments made by councillors are being captured and will be presented by myself or Tom on the 7th of February. So do we agree with that course of action? Those in favour, please indicate. Those against? Those abstaining? No, that's carried then. Thank you. Item 9. Corporate Support Services Recommissioning Update. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. The report in front of you, as the Chairman has said, is providing an update to ASMB on the progress made on implementing the future service delivery model for corporate support services when the existing contract with Serco ends in March 2024. The initial focus of the programme has been on setting up the necessary governance at programme and project level and commissioning activity for the Customer Service Centre and for IMT. The Customer Service Centre commissioning is progressing and is on track, and we're expecting initial tenders to be submitted tomorrow to the Council. A review will take place of the initial tenders to determine if an award can be made at this stage or if it's beneficial to open up negotiation to improve tenders. Final tenders are to be submitted early in May, with a contract award which will be confirmed in mid-July following the 10-day standstill period. For HR administration and payroll services, we're looking to move those to Hoople Shared Service Centre. The Council are a shareholder in Hoople, and we have an officer who sits on the Hoople board. We were asked to undertake additional due diligence of Hoople, and that's been undertaken as requested. A specification of the Council service requirements has been developed, and that was issued this month to Hoople. We've undertaken some joint development work on terms and conditions, and that's moving forward. Hoople's initial response to the Council's requirements is expected in April. We're planning for negotiation to reach a final submission, with again a contract award planned for July. Adult care finance and exchequer services are to return to the Council. We've been working with Serco, the current service provider, to better understand their service delivery model. This has identified areas of the current service provision that will not be available to the Council when services transfer. Work has commenced on developing the Council's solutions in these areas in readiness for April 2024. In terms of IMT, I'm going to hand over to Andrew Crookham to give an update on what's happening in that area.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chairman. So I thought I'd take this part of the introduction just to bring members up to speed with developments related to the IMT part of the contract, given that members scrutinised the proposal for IMT services back in May. Having taken the service on during, from April 22 onwards, obviously a significant learning experience in terms of the IMT function for the council, but also as we've progressed through I guess the negotiations and information gathering exercises with Serco, the current incumbent provider, it became apparent that difficulties would be visible in terms of staffing the proposed model that came through scrutiny and member decision making earlier in 2022. Members will recall particularly questions at that time around the service integration proposal, vendor management and project management expertise that would potentially be coming across to the council. The way that Serco structure themselves across a national account basis meant that we were going to be in a position where there were going to be significant vacancies coming across on day one. That coupled with a detailed exploration of the way that IMT was operating, particularly in that space around vendor management, and we refer in the paper to maturity levels, meant it was, I think it was incumbent to reassess the timing of the bringing the model in-house. So we've paused that process at the moment. We've exercised something known as termination rights in the existing contract to continue with Serco for a period of 2 years to allow us to assess whether that model is still right for us. So we've not overturned the original decision made by members, we've just paused it for now to see whether we can increase the maturity levels in the service to be able to take to bring those back in still, or whether a more suitable model would be required, and that would be one, if that is the case, that would be one that we'd bring back to members in due course. I just wanted to give members the opportunity, well, provide members with an update or verbal update on that. Thanks, Mike.
Right. Sorry, thank you. Anybody want to ask any questions? Could you guys go to page 75, 2.5, where we can see the breakup of the different responsibilities that we've outsourced. And we start off with the customer service centre, moving on to information, ICT, moving on to HR, admin and payroll, moving on to adult social care, finance, etc. To what extent have we given any thought to continuing a together relationship with an outside contractor other than Serco?
Sorry, Councillor Barker, would you be able to just clarify the question a second? I didn't...
Sorry?
Would you be able to clarify the question? I didn't catch the full...
Well, the final point about it, individual project boards reporting into the CSI programme board have been introduced. Each project has its own individual project, and then it lists them. I'm looking at page 75, which talks about, first of all, customer service centre, then information, ICT, then HR, and then adult social care. Now, that they, all of them, exit from the Serco contract, exit from the Serco contract, exit from the Serco contract. Okay, to what extent have we had what I'm going to call a benefit analysis of these 4 projects, which are all going to be tackled in a different sort of way, it seems, rather than, for example, going to the market again and looking for a provider that can deliver more than Serco can?
If I could do with that, Chair, we developed as part of the Commissioning Support Services Review Programme, which concluded in May and June of last year, we looked at all the different commissioning options for all those different types of services. One of the options that we did look at was continuing with the same model that we've got with Serco, But at that time, it was felt that that wasn't the best fit for us, not least because IT was continuing to move. The way the technology worked with it was so that we needed increasingly specialist suppliers rather than a general outsourcing supplier, which is what Serco is. And I think in fairness, Serco would recognise that going forward, continuing to provide IMT specialist services is only something that they can add so much value to, and that was one of the main reasons for it. But certainly those reports went through the scrutiny process and to executive in May and in June of last year. The driver, I think, for adult care finance was to bring that out in-house because there were so many changes happening in the national picture, and it was increasingly important for us to make sure we managed the debt that the council carried from that down to enable us to have robust budget. In terms of HR, admin and payroll, the decision had been taken to continue to outsource the CSC, and we did look at HR, admin and payroll to see if we could outsource that in a competitive marketplace, but there just wasn't a marketplace for public sector payroll, which is why the other option of Hoople was attractive to the council, because it would build on our relationship with them with Unit 4, but also they were experienced of delivering payroll to both the corporate and schools elements, and those arguments were rehearsed at length, as I say, last year.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wants to comment on the paper that we've got before us about the corporate support services recommissioning? No? Okay. The overview. OSMB is invited to review and seek assurance on the contents of the report. Yes, we've sought some assurances. Okay. Those in favour of it going forward? Those against? Those abstaining? None. Okay. Thank you. Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. Okay. We've got before us two papers, Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee, three, Highways and Transport and Flood and Water. So if we go to Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is the report on the Environment and Economy Committee. The activity report is on pages 86 to 89 of the agenda pack, and we actually had our last meeting very recently on the 17th of January. Key messages have been captured in the report that you have in front of you. I'd only really like to note a couple of items. Our discussion on the revenue and capital budget proposals 23-24 for the environment, economy and waste service areas. And the comments we agreed to pass on to the executive for their consideration were around, firstly, the £735,000 saving on the waste contract. This was relevant to the rollout of the paper and card recycling scheme, which so far we understand is going very well indeed. We were informed that financial gains from the twin stream of paper and card collection were not shared with the district councils, rightly so, because LCC bore the sole risks for the scheme. But of course they offset the costs of waste disposal. We're very pleased to hear that the income generated by that project is, in part at least, being put back into an improved engagement programme that included school visits and talking to residents with the overall objective of improving take-up of the service. Chairman, in addition, members acknowledge the enormously important value of broadband across the whole of the county. The committee was informed that £5.5 million was allocated to the provision of superfast broadband in future years. The programme has already provided 96% of properties in Lincolnshire with superfast broadband, which is easier to do than say. That triggered a performance bonus that was agreed with the contractor, as BT, in 2012, and that will be used to fill in gaps in provision and increasing broadband speed. And there was an ongoing process whereby the government was expected, within the course of the next 9 months, Chairman, to identify what gaps they were covering, following which there would be a decision on which elements of the remainder of that the remainder of those funds would be allocated to. Moving on, the other pre-decision item that we considered at the meeting was the reprocurement of the Household Waste Recycling Centre's management and operation contracts. The committee supported the recommendation to the Executive Council unanimously, and we did receive assurances on a couple of points. Firstly, ensuring that service provision and standards were not affected adversely by the proposed changes and that there would be no gaps in the service provision which was anticipated, which is very, very important to our residents. We were pleased to hear that a seamless handover would be underway between the incumbents and various new contractors. We also recognise the importance of the message to the public being that there will be no disruption to business as usual. And as part of that, Chairman, we also discussed concerns over fly tipping and the possibility that might be associated with residents who didn't drive and therefore might have difficulty taking larger objects to recycling centres. In fact, we were assured that district councils offered supplementary services to residents who didn't have access directly, and also that the district councils were strongly of the opinion that the problems with fly tipping we have at the moment are really associated less with individuals and much more with illegal businesses accepting to dispose waste, then dumping it on the highway. That is an offence, and a number of successful prosecutions, we were told, have recently taken place. Chairman, looking to the future, our planned work streams can be found on pages 89 to 94 of the agenda pack. As you can see, we have a very busy schedule of future meetings and a list of items to be programmed, which is being closely monitored by the committee and leading officers. Chairman, I'd like to conclude with a more general point about the economy, and it actually relates back to the first item that we discussed today. We are the Environment and Economy Committee, so we are closely interested in it. We are all, I think, aware of the cost of living pressures which exist at the moment, and in fact the way that the County Council has come together with districts and other bodies to provide advice and to channel assistance to residents is something which, as with our work in the pandemic, I think we can be proud of. Those residents who are most vulnerable, as we said earlier, always have to be foremost in our minds. But there was an interesting theme which came out of our most recent meeting, which is around the fact that economic indicators are not quite as uniformly bad as people might think. There are some bellwether retailers, for example, who had a very positive Christmas and New Year. There are some areas of very highly discretionary family spending, for example, holidays and flight bookings, which are at their highest for 4 years. And we didn't enter, as a country, a recession in the last quarter, contrary to universal predictions. Now, many indicators of the economy are indeed not good. Inflation, productivity, the labour market, and manufacturing are areas of real concerns. But the committee had a theme that really the variations here be that we are not in a situation without hope. And in a discussion that was triggered really by the report of the portfolio holder for economy, Councillor Davey, we focused quite a lot on various agenda items on the role that local government itself can play. A very positive and a very active role helping to drive economic development. In other words, enabling business to do what it does best, which is to do business. It's something where the committee felt that this county council, district colleagues, and also bodies like the GLEB are making a real difference. And I just observed, colleagues, that I think that applies to the scrutiny process itself. In other words, we're not just here to check what others do. We have the ability to be proactive in making sure that in the case of our committee, that the Lincolnshire economy is able to grow and to flourish, and hence residents to prosper along with it. Chairman, that really concludes my update to you and to members of this committee. Happy to take any questions which may arise.
Thank you. Yeah, Jackie.
Thank you for that report. That was very interesting. Thank you. I wonder if I could ask you about broadband, please, in a specific area. An awful lot of work has been done on the broadband, but in my division, the village of Riseholme is suffering very badly, and I wonder if I could raise it to your committee's attention. We have the Links lab there, and they have broadband. It works fine. It's actually in the same street as where the residents live. We also have the Riseholme campus of the university, but the residents are completely blighted. They've been promised all sorts of things down the years, and we've been working on it for about 5 years, and their internet is so poor. Basically, sometimes you can't even send an email. So they really are struggling, and I wonder if I can raise it to you with a hope that we can get some support for this. Thank you.
Chairman, I'm very happy to give an assurance that we will indeed take that to the relevant parties. I would just observe that although enormous progress has been made, I think probably most of us would know in our divisions, or indeed if we're dual-hatted our wards, there are still not spots. And they're not always in the most deeply rural areas where you might expect them to be. They sometimes crop up quite near to major centres. I was dealing with one myself. A very important local business moved into a new premises on a business park. They need a great deal of broadband. They're in publishing and printing, very large file sizes. We were able to intervene and step in and provide a solution to them. And it is incredibly important that we do just that. But we'll certainly take your comments about Riseholme to the relevant people.
Great, thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Carrington, for that report. It was really interesting, and it's something on the future programme that's caught my eye as Chairman of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee is local electric vehicle infrastructure, the pilot and a report on that. And I was just thinking that it's not on Highways and Transport Scrutiny's programme, but I was thinking it would be useful if it was to enable the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee to have a look at that also. I do get questions directed at me about electric vehicle provision and how we're going to move forward with that in the future on that, you know, with being on that committee. So I can't quite... I presume this is this more from a planning and economic point of view that it's on your agenda, and less so from a highways and transport point of view. But I would be really interested in anything in that affects affects the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Chairman, picking that one up, happy to talk about that going forward. I think the report is with us for exactly the reasons that Councillor Brooks has mentioned. It is a pilot programme. It did involve an element of grant funding to enable it to happen. We know that provision of electric vehicle charging is challenging, particularly in areas where, for example, there is in urban areas with terraced housing, where it's particularly difficult. We know it is something which is very important because at the moment there is a shortage of it, and the ratio of charging points, public charging points to vehicles is not improving. It is getting worse because the number of charging points is not growing at the same rate as the number of electric vehicles. So it is a very, very important matter. Happy to discuss where it sits within the committees with Councillor Brooks and officers going forward.
Hi. Yep.
Hello, thank you. Yara Gatiano, Scrutiny Officer responsible for both committees. I can offer a mitigation. In this instance, we can invite members of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee to virtually attend or physically attend the next meeting where the item will be discussed and allow them to contribute to this discussion if that is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm just interested in knowing which portfolio holder electric vehicles comes under. Is it highways or is it, in a sense, the environment?
Perhaps Kiera can help me.
Okay.
It's one of those areas that are cutting across portfolios, so we treat them in a sense, we share these between the two committees. Historically, this is what we've done. So the document was intended to be circulated and made available to members of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee, as well as Environment and Economy. But as I said, you would be more than welcome to attend the meeting and contribute to the discussion around the item.
Yep. I'll make a pronouncement, Chairman.
Yes, now
I'll talk to the two relevant portfolio holders, see who wants it the least. Because there may be some targets attached to it, so that might, we'll see anyway. So yeah, a fair point. It does probably need one person. I would, yes, okay, I'll talk to colleagues.
Okay, fine. Continuing, anybody else want to raise any questions about environment and economy? Just one. How do this is on page 86. Service level performance against the corporate performance framework for Q2. I'm just interested in how we capture business growth. In other words, is it on a net or a gross basis? So do we actually say business growth, X number of new businesses, but Y number of businesses that have failed, okay, and are no longer part of the business community. And it does say here more data was requested on businesses, etc., in receipt of economic support. But I just wonder, from looking at it in the round, how we capture business growth. Somebody help?
Thank you very much. Yes, so on the corporate plan that are clearly measured in the success framework, the performance indicators that are measured through the local enterprise partnership that we use is the number of new businesses and then the number of businesses that have closed. So that's how it's measured in the corporate plan currently. The corporate plan is up for refresh in terms of moving forward. So again, if people wanted us to engage with people and review that, we could do. But that's currently how it's measured.
But if we, yeah, fine, that really solves my issue. But if we're going to have reports about business growth, then it's got to be numerical to an extent, contributing towards business growth that doesn't tell us about how well we're doing relatively. That's all. Okay. So that's Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee. The next one is Highways and Transport. Okay. Yep, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I will take the report as read and therefore focus on the contents of the agenda that was considered this past Monday, the 23rd of January, and give the board a quick overview and flavour of the topics discussed. As I said earlier, I didn't actually chair that meeting because I was ill, but I was watching on the link. The committee considered the revenue and capital budget proposals 2023-24, which I did refer to earlier in the earlier debate, for the highways and transport service areas. Some of the key points raised during the debate included: we received assurances that the proposed funding allocation to ongoing and future projects and schemes was sufficient, and that deliverables already agreed in design were not being affected by inflation and changes in the construction market. Members sought for assurances that projects and schemes already in train were not being delayed, which would increase the risk of further cost increases, and were pleased to hear that contractors were incentivised to expedite delivery and avoid themselves in unnecessary spending. We were also informed that the budget for some projects, for example the Spalding Western Relief Road Section 1, were being put back to future years to allow the capital allocated to that to be reallocated towards increases in other areas such as the Grantham Southern Relief Road. Finally, the committee was informed of the positive long-term effects anticipated by the fall of the diesel price on budgets. Nevertheless, we were reminded that cost increases in the market were also driven by pressure on wage rates and drivers and vehicle shortages. In relation to the annual civil parking enforcement report that we received, the key messages were that enforcement was conducted in a firm but fair manner, Over 35,000 tickets were issued in the period from the 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2022, one of the highest numbers on record since 2012, when civil parking enforcement was introduced to the county. Members inquired around potential measures that could be introduced in hotspots. A £50,000 deficit was endured or was incurred over the covered period. It was highlighted that the income stream for the service remained mainly revenue recovered from penalty charge notices, and any additional needs were drawn from reserves of the civil parking income stream. And I did inquire about that civil parking reserve that is there, and at the moment deficits on the civil parking enforcement would be covered up to 24-25 and possibly within 25-26 if they carried on how they are at the moment. We did used to make a little bit of money which went into the reserve. The contract with APCOA is due to expire at the end of 2024, and we were pleased to hear that action was already being taken to rewrite the contract, but also seeking to introduce further efficiencies that may be picked up from our contact with colleagues in other authorities and obviously from our experiences through this present contract. During the debate, we also discussed concerns around enforcement of parking restrictions, for example, yellow lines, and received assurances that clarity over responsibility of taking action was something that officers in liaison with the police were actively engaging on. Members emphasised on the crucial role of patrolling and visible presence of officers that helped raise awareness to the public. The committee also received an annual position paper on the approach to transport strategy developments, and were informed that the new Stamford strategy should be expected towards the end of the year. Therefore, this item has now been added to our list of items to be programmed. In the same meeting, we also considered the highways gully cleaning, drainage repair schemes and surface water flooding report, and were updated on the reactive, cyclic and planned aspects of highways drainage maintenance, including low-level flooding response. As part of this discussion, we were updated on the Highway Drainage Legacy Data Capture Project, which is aimed at optimising holding and handling of data through the review of existing records. The project is currently in phase 2 and 3 and will allow the service to expand on the cyclic maintenance regimes in the future and introduce condition monitoring of assets. Lastly, the committee considered an interim report on winter service, which informed us on salt stocks across our depots, informed us of the 90 precautionary salting turnouts to date, and were given assurances that the process of updating our fleet, which is underway, was still progressing, and we were informed that 12 new gritters were introduced into the fleet at the end of January 2023. With another 13 being anticipated in October 2023, replacing existing vehicles which have reached the end of their life. Moving on to our planned future work, that can be found on pages 98 to 99 of the agenda pack. Some changes to be highlighted are that the item Grantham Future High Street Public Realm Improvements, part of pre-decision scrutiny, is not an exempt item. And in relation to the preparatory work around a future in-depth review of traffic management in Lincolnshire, I would like to make you aware that the working group has now met in November and agreed the themes to be covered in the next meeting in February, which will lead to us setting up the terms of reference and scope for the review that will be conducted in the future by one of the scrutiny panels. This includes my update to you and members of this board, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, very comprehensive report. Anybody want to ask any questions about one of the things that usually keeps councillors in work, if nothing else? Highways. Yep. No. No questions at all? fine. Honestly, thank you. That was, the comprehensiveness must have satisfied everybody.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Try to
Okay. Thanks,
anticipate
Mike.
things. Thank you.
Councillor Ashton, your report, flood and yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my update to the board, I would like to pass on the apologies of the Chairman, Councillor Reid, who unfortunately is unable to be with us today due to diary commitments. Mr. Chairman, the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee report can be found on pages 100 and 101 of the agenda pack. At our last meeting, we received updates from the flood risk team, our partners, namely the Environment Agency and Anglian Water. Some points to be highlighted following our November meeting are as follows. The committee has agreed a workshop to be arranged and facilitated by our leading officers in conjunction and collaboration with Emergency Response, Environment Agency, Anglian Water and Drainage Board. Through the workshop, we aim at providing an overview of different issues and how these are dealt with by our flooding team and partners, and will look at mapping investment opportunities. The date for this workshop will be advised soon. Furthermore, we tasked the flood manager with looking at the Memorandum of Understanding with district councils and are expecting an update on the progress of this in our next meeting on the 20th of February. And lastly, the committee has been in close liaison with the Environment Agency in relation to issues experienced in the River Witham that runs through Boston, the overgrowth of weeds in conjunction with poor water quality caused by dry weather, has had a negative impact on the fish population and has caused pollution near the centre of Boston that has affected the lives of residents. In our next meeting, we have requested a specific report update on this matter and will continue to monitor mitigation activities. And I'm grateful to say that the Environment Agency has indeed furnished that response, and that has been shared already with members of that committee. In terms of future agenda items, in addition to regular updates, the report provides you with a list of items to be scheduled in future months, and I would like in turn to provide assurance that we are working closely with officers and partners alike to design and update the agendas across 2023 and 2024. This concludes my update to you and members of this board, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks. You've heard from Tom. Questions? Yeah. Okay. Just a quick one. Natural, well, not a quick one, but if you could tell us more about natural flood management, which I know you're going to be discussing in the future, but do you want to say something briefly about what we think natural flood management is?
I'm very happy to give it a go.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, to my mind, natural flood management comes down to making space for water, and in part managing water upstream to slow flow down so that it doesn't impact downstream in quite the same way. But it is quite a complicated thing, and I look forward to exploring it far more fully in our future meetings.
Anybody else want to raise anything on flood and water management? No? Okay, so just give me a tick. Fine, that's the Scrutiny Committee work programmes. We receive reports which set out the work programmes of the environment and economy, highways and transport, and water management in accordance with our agreed programme. Okay, and I'm sure that everybody realises that the actions required, are we satisfied with the activity? This is on page 83 of the 3 committee reports that we've received, and also the advanced work programme, their planned work programme. So if we're happy with what we've heard, can we indicate please by voting in favour of the motion? Thank you. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? Nope. The motion's carried. as an item for information only, our work programme, which is page 103 to 116. Thank you for your attendance today. Declare the meeting closed.